Welcome to the East Martian Chronicles podcast.
And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant...
It's 10th of June 2021 here on The Edge of Things, and you are welcome to episode 4 of the East Martian Chronicles. Today we'll be looking at Robert Tressell, or Noonan, or Croker's book, The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists, which is likely the first novel by a working class writer who's been called the man who made a million socialists. And our guests today are Scarlett and Sophie Rickard, who have created a graphic novel, transformed the novel to suit our own times.
Scarlett is an illustrator and graphic artist living in Kent. Sophie is a writer and child counsellor living in Cheshire. They're both collie owners. Despite living hundreds of miles apart, they work closely on every stage of their projects and have a lot of fun doing it. The sisters grew up in the Ribble Valley in Lancashire, and the culture and landscape of the Northwest feature prominently in their first novel, Man's Best Friend. Their latest graphic novel, as Jill said, is an adaptation of Robert Tressell's working class classic, The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists, with self-made hero. Right, well, here's my first question. Sophie and Scarlett, could you give our listeners a brief summary of the book itself, the big fat doorstep version of the book? And also, why are the ragged trousered people called philanthropists in the first place?
Okay, so here is a very long book in a short paragraph, I hope. The book is called The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists, which is a very difficult to pronounce and extremely annoying to fit on a cover title. No one can spell it, but it's a good title because the people are ragged trousered because they can't afford new clothes, they have holes and patches, and they are philanthropists because they are working charitably to make somebody else better off. So a philanthropist is somebody like Bill Gates who likes to benefit the needy by giving some money. And in this story, it's all about the ordinary working people who are working to better their employers more than they better themselves. So the story is about a group of families, the men of whom work together and work for low wages, enriching their employers. And it's about, in some ways, it's about one man's mission to try and get them to understand that it's the system that keeps them that way, and it doesn't have to be like that forever.
That is a fantastic answer and a great summary. And that idea of mission there with Frank Owen. And actually, he's not alone, is he? I mean, he does have other socialists out there working, but they are very much in a minority in their small working community.
And I think Owen, in some ways, Owen doesn't ingratiate himself to his workmates. You know, he says things like, if there wasn't something wrong with your minds, and we're not really sure that that's the best way to make people change what they think about things.
But I thought that was very good that Robert Tressell kept those things in, because it's very similar to the conversations we can see developing all around us on social media, where people are taking that approach and meeting brick walls, and other conversations where that start with, so imagine all the people lived in a house, and Crass says, oh, we always have to start by imagining things, you know. So the different types of rhetoric are given space, and the objections are also given space. So it's a good way of working through both sides of an argument.
I like the way that his main protagonist in Frank Owen isn't necessarily he's not a goody two shoes. He's not somebody that is meant to be perfect. He's got his own flaws, I like that. I think that was a brave way of doing it, I think.
And he's also not a well man himself, is he? And that makes him question his mortality and what happens to particularly his children afterwards.
And it's very relevant because there is no way that a community can exist under those conditions without it affecting health. And I think that's something that is so prevalent around us today. I mean, especially relating to COVID, that health is also a social inequality issue.
It's economically driven, isn't it?
Fantastic. Thank you. Over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Billy. You've already said that this is basically this novel is about ordinary working people working for low wages, enriching others. You know, how the more things change, the more they stay the same. But Frank Owen develops the case for money being the cause of poverty, especially in the section, The Great Money Trick. So what is the Great Money Trick? How does it work? So, and this is really famous, isn't it? The Great Money Trick. So what did he do here? What did Tressell do here?
This is a really famous passage because it is how Tressell used the bits and pieces out of people's lunchbox to explain Marx's theory of surplus value, which sounds impossible, but it's actually not that hard to describe. But what we did find is that it really helps to have some pictures to go with it. But essentially, what he demonstrates is that the workers, because they don't own the raw materials and because they don't own the means of production, in other words, the factories and the mills, they give their time and they're recompensed with only just enough to keep them alive long enough to do another day's work the next day, while the people who do own the raw materials and the means of production, like the factories, get richer on account of that day's work, and they're able to save and to build up money, whereas the workers, who are the ones that are actually adding value to the process, only ever get recompensed enough to keep them coming back.
And he explains all this using pieces of bread and gets them to cut a bit of bread up into little squares, and then he gives them each a sovereign, which is really a penny, for each square of bread. But then they need to spend that penny to buy bread to eat. And so it sort of goes round and round. There's no way they can get out of that cycle. And then at the end, you know, they're hungry. They want to buy more bread, but they've got no money. And he says, well, you should have saved. You know,
and how could they save? They couldn't save, could they? Because they had to buy the bread. And I think actually the way that you've illustrated it in the book is really great, because you can see it. So especially, it's hard to grasp, I think, concepts like that. So to be able to see it, to physically, here's your little bit of sandwich, here's my penny, thanks very much, put it in my pocket, I'll have all this, you've got nothing, it's very powerful, I think, the way that you did that. That's really good. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. I think some people are quicker to pick stuff like that up than others. I think. So I think having it in pictures really helps with people who aren't, natural readers. And I mean, Sophie's much more academic than I am. Like I have to really think to work out economic theory like that. So for people like me, it's great being able to have it in pictures.
Oh, it's great for me as well, Scarlett, honestly. Great for me as well.
The East Martian Chronicles podcast has been funded by the William Alderson Foundation in support of our new branch of the Workers' Educational Association, the WEA, the East Marsh Community Education Branch. Please do get in touch and let us know what you want to listen to and discuss. There are good things happening here. Come and be a part of it. So that was The Great Money Trick. We also have something else that's great in there. And actually, in the graphic novel itself, you can see the greatness of it standing out right there. And when you pick the book up, you look at that, your eyes are drawn to that section immediately. And actually, as you work through, and that there's the claustrophobia really of the environment that these people live in, and then you get to the great oration, and it's fantastic enough when Tressell does it, actually. But when you guys do it, my God, this is socialism, psychedelic socialism. It's a wonder. You literally break the frame here. The story breaks down and becomes something transcendent. And I wonder if you could talk a little to that.
Yeah, I really wanted that section to be utopian, to break you out of your everyday little box. Because I think all the way through the book, you're kind of living with the characters in their little houses with their really difficult lives, and this is a chapter which is basically Barrington talking about what socialism is and how things could be. And so it's kind of utopian and fantastical in some ways for the people who are listening to it, because they can't imagine anything other than their lives. And so I wanted to do it in a way that really was a surprise. I wanted it to be to hit the reader when they got there, because it kind of, it shows a hope, the contrast between the drudgery of a capitalist life and the potential that there is there for changing things for the better for everybody. And so it was that kind of, but also, I'm really into, Russian constructivist posters and stuff like that, and psychedelic posters, and so there was a bit of all of that mixed in together, I think, when I was putting it together. Yeah.
So, Sophie, what do you think from the great oration? What are the key messages in there that really resonate for you today in our world?
The great oration is the part of the book where Barrington finally breaks his silence. And I've got a lot of opinions about Barrington that we can talk about in a minute. But and it's the place where he is laying out to his fellow workmates what could be possible. And I think the main thing is that the way that he begins is to say, people will say there's always been rich and poor in the world, there always will be, there's nothing you can do, and that is a lie, and it doesn't have to be that way, and by accepting that you're joining in, and this is another way it could be. And he goes on to explain in great detail, even with like a process of how we could get from where we are now to this utopian dream, explaining how by essentially bringing more and more things into state ownership and having the state run by the civilians within it, we would stop wasting our effort on capitalism. So we would stop wasting all our resources on shiny adverts and things that don't improve people's lives, but in fact maybe make them worse. And we would, as a society, be able to all put efforts into things that bring everybody up together. So everybody's doing something useful, and we would all have more leisure and a better quality of life.
Mm. One of my favourite lines from that chapter is where someone says to him, "What, you mean that aristocrats will be the same as the likes of us?" And Barrington said, "There won't be the likes of us. Everybody will be civilized." And that's a great way around of looking at it, because they're so used to the idea that aristocrats are so much above them that they're just a different species almost.
And that's something that you see around us all the time, whether it is the royal family or whether it's, the super rich, whether it's Beyonce and Jay-Z, the idea that they somehow deserve nicer things than you and me, when actually maybe it would be nice if we all had good enough things.
Yeah.
So Barrington is interesting, isn't he? Turns out he's from a wealthy background, spoiler. And he's the one that actually delivers the great oration. So what's your issue with this, Sophie?
So I'd be very interested to hear when your reading group gets to the end of the book, to hear what people think of Barrington, because I think he is as much autobiographical as Owen is. So Tressell, I think, has put himself into three characters: Easton, Owen and Barrington, and there are aspects of their lives that relate to his own experiences. But Barrington's role in the story is a little bit like the theatrical device called Deus Ex Machina, when a god comes out of the machinery and just fixes everything at the end. So the end of the story is basically Barrington writing a check, using his dad's money to help Owen to promote socialism in Mugsborough. But if you just think for 1 minute about where Barrington's dad's money has come from, it's been made from Barrington's dad doing the money trick on some other people in some other town, and nobody really questions that. My other issue with Barrington is that during the course of the novel, he's basically cosplaying as being a working class person, and he is taking a job and taking a wage, and poor Noonan is sent to debtor's prison because he's got the sack, and Barrington is taking a salary that he doesn't need. Meanwhile, doing some kind of like freelance
sociology experiment.
Yeah. And observing these working class people as though he's in a zoo or something. So I have ethical and moral issues with Barrington's way of doing things. But interestingly, I suspect Tressell did too, because he could have gone to university and he could have had an allowance from his father, and he rejected those things and decided to be a painter and decorator like Frank Owen instead.
I think you've given us a fantastic thread for our Ragged reading group there. Thank you. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you. I wonder if we could just have a quick look at the women in the book. So we've got Nora Owen, she's as class conscious as her husband is. And then we look at Ruth Easton, and you see the effects of capitalist exploitation, I think, very clearly in Ruth. So how do you think Tressell portrayed women in the book and in those times it was set? And how do you think we would assess that portrayal now?
I feel like Tressell is not given enough credit for the sensitive way that he portrays women's lives in this book, and the way that he makes sure that the women and the children's lives are integral to the understanding of how the capitalism system works. Particularly Ruth is an example of a story as old as time, where somebody with less economic power ends up being exploited, whether that is economically or sexually. There are all kinds of different ways that capitalism can rough you up, and that's just one of them.
Mary as well is very badly affected by economics. You know, she's a widow, her husband died in the war, and she's living with her in-laws, and the father of the house is made redundant because like a lot of people now, he's an older, more experienced worker, very good at his job, so he was able to earn more money. And of course the employers don't want to pay more money. They want to employ people who are really cheap, even if they're not as good at the job. So he got made redundant because of that. And so they're ending up, they've ended up in real dire straits. She's having to pawn, sell all the furniture, and her in-laws have had to go into the workhouse, and so you see her life getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And all this time she's trying to make ends meet by sewing blouses at home, and working hours and hours and hours a day at the sewing machine for hardly anything.
And then the next level of that is that you see her daughter, Elsie, taking on childcare responsibilities. So of all the children in the story, it's the female child that does the domestic labour while mum's busy doing piecework to enrich somebody else.
To enrich the man whose house all the men are working in, that's really opulent.
Yeah.
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 So it kind of, I mean, I think the women are really important. And one of the things about the Ragged Trousered Philanthropists is, historically, when you talk to people about the book, they often sort of think of the money trick, and they think of all the people, all the workmen sitting together talking about politics, and they never mention the women, hardly ever. And I think part of that is that a lot of people just read the beginning and haven't got as far as the bit with Ruth and Easton and stuff.
Possibly.
Something that I've really noticed is that the general conversation about this book is almost always the first third.
Yeah.
Yes, I think you're right. So hopefully when people see your graphic edition, they will actually get through
hopefully.
the whole book. Yeah, and then we can have more discussions about women and how they're portrayed. Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for that.
So final question here for you. Tressell, as we've noted, finishes the book on an optimistic note. And if he were to rise from his grave and look around our merry England, what would he think?
Oh God, here we go again, probably.
I think he'd be appalled that so little has changed.
Yeah.
I think, although having said that, so much did change and it's winding back again.
I think that's what's really appalling, that we did end up with a lot of the stuff that's in the Great Erasure, like the NHS and free education and all of this, nationalised railways and all of this stuff, and we're losing it.
If he'd chosen to pop up 50 years ago, he would have a different picture than if he rose from his grave today.
Also, the original book, I'm not sure, did end on a optimistic note, did it?
There was an edition that was published that didn't get all the way to the end.
Oh, yes, that's right.
That ended with him contemplating suicide, which was a bold move.
Not quite the socialist uplands that you might be hoping for.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always in mind of Jude the Obscure when he was considering taking the kids out as well, wasn't he? And there was so many resonances there of Hardy, actually, as well as a working man and a writer.
And I think that was actually really common as well. This kind of murder-suicide thing with working people who just can't hold everything together, killing their families and killing themselves. And it was not uncommon. In fact, the book we're working on at the moment has another story of the similar thing happening.
And it still happens now. I mean, downer on it, but there's a reason why I work for the NSPCC.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to try and summarize a little of what we've done, just to recap. So, first of all, the word philanthropists itself is really difficult to say and hard to understand, but actually it's perfect because these people are generous to their oppressors, essentially, and they gave, in many cases, their lives to satisfy their luxury. And, Frank Owen had a mission, didn't he? And that comes through very, very clearly. Is such a serious-minded man, and he's got a purpose in life. And with the money trick, very cleverly uses pieces of bread to explain Marx, which is fantastic. And it is justly famous, isn't it? And it comes out so well with the graphic version because it is so visual. And once you read those few pages, actually, wow, this is how you get Marx. And it's fantastic because that analysis of society still stands, I think. So the idea of the fact that the workers don't own the materials, the factories, the mills, and they're forced only to trade in their time, and they get just enough to get by on.
There's so much stuff that is so relevant now. The whole idea of this gig economy and 0 hours contracts, people's rent being such a massive proportion of their income. In fact, in the book, he says it was rent was a third of the income, and in some parts of Britain, it's more than half now. And so in some ways we're worse off than we were in 1910, which is awful. People think of 1910 and they think of workhouses and stuff. But, I mean, there are lots of situations now which are not better off than then. So.
Thank you very much for joining us, Scarlett and Sophie.
Sophie and Scarlett, have you got any closing remarks? And would you like to talk about your current stroke next project briefly?
Well, my remarks, really, I was thinking about this the other day and actually thinking, I can't actually believe that we did this. Like, it seemed like such a ridiculously ambitious project when we started it. It was a very difficult book to adapt. And I can't really believe that we pulled it off. And so thank you so much for all the lovely things you said about it, because it's great to know that people are enjoying it, and that even people who really love the original are enjoying it alongside the original, which is really lovely. So it's been a really exciting project for us to be involved in, even though doing it was a long slog in some ways.
So shall I tell you about the next thing? Coming out sort of autumn 2022, also from Self-Made Hero, will be our graphic adaptation of Constance Maud's No Surrender. So it's got a lot in common with the Ragged Trousered Philanthropists in that it's written by somebody who was on the ground, similar era, 1910-ish, and this time it's all about extending votes to women and the various battles that women went through to reach that point. So it's got a very Trousers-ish vibe of people trying to persuade each other of a new way of thinking about things. And it's also very exciting and got lots of civil disobedience in it, which is very fun to draw.
So trousers-ish is going to be a fantastic new shorthand for me. So that's brilliant. Over to you, Jill. Any final comments from you, and take us out of the show?
Well, I just really want to thank Scarlett and Sophie for joining us. It's been really, really interesting, and I can't wait to see your next book. I'll certainly be investing in it, and we will feed back any and all comments that we get from our reading group, won't we, Billy? Because I before I was a manager, I was a tutor, and I used to teach English, teach literacy, and I've worked with so many people who never read because they think it's not for them, because they can't, or they tried and they couldn't, or the books are too big, or there's no pictures, or whatever, I can't find my glasses. And I think that having something like the graphic novel is a really good way in for people to be able to join in, because I always remember teaching someone who had never read a book because she thought she couldn't, and when she finally did read one of the quick reads, very slim volumes, she said it was great. She said, because I went to work the next day and they were talking about the book that I'd read. She said, and I could join in. And she was so pleased and proud. And I think for me, that's what it's one of the things that this is all about, people being able to join in, to feel part of it. So yeah, it's marvellous. Thank you very much indeed. And I just have to go back to my script now, Billy. Edit that bit out.
Can I just say something quickly as well? Sorry, I know you've got to wrap it up. But one of the things about the graphic novel that we found is that dyslexic people have really enjoyed reading it. Who've never read a book before, because they're dyslexic, it can handle it really well and positively enjoy it, which is really good feedback. It's something that we're quite passionate about, making things accessible. And the other thing is that the Ragged Trousered Philanthropists over the years has been recommended by people, for years and years and years, people saying you must read this book. And for a lot of people, it's just not available to them. It's not a possibility because it's far too big and daunting, and for dyslexics it's impossible. So we wanted to make it a way that all the people who've been recommended read it actually have the opportunity to do that and feel that they have actually read it, even though it's an adaptation. We've tried to keep it as close to the original as we can so that people feel like they've actually read the book.
Yeah.
And I hope that works.
Yes, I think it does. And I'll certainly be recommending it to people. Thank you very much, both of you. And the next episode, we'll hear more from Scarlett and Sophie as an East Martian writer and an East Martian artist, quiz them about the process in the graphic novel. We also have regular Ragged study circles where we discuss the issues that are raised in the podcasts. If you'd like to contribute and be part of the study circle, get in touch with us by email at info@eastmarshunited.org, on Twitter @EastMarshUnited, or find us on Facebook, East Marsh United. Thanks very much. See you then.